Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. On Wednesday, the Biden administration Education Secretary Miguel Cardona announced that the Education Department will grant blanket automatic debt cancellation to all students of Corinthian colleges, which disbanded in 2015 after state and federal investigations into its misleading marketing and job placement claims. The department will also refund all borrowers with outstanding balances on their loans for payments they made. This will affect all borrowers who attended Corinthian schools and took out loans from 1995 to 2015. This is expected to lead to $5.8 billion in discharges to 560,000 borrowers. This is the single largest student debt discharge in U.S. history, and that is on top of the 100,000 Corinthian debtors who've already received full or partial relief. At its peak, Corinthian was one of the nation's largest for-profit college companies with more than 100 campuses across the country and more than 110,000 students at its Everest, Wyotech, and Heald schools. Tonight, I am pleased to have one of the activists from the Corinthian 15, a group of former students who refused to pay their student debt. Latonya Suggs as my guest, along with another former student from another for-profit college not included in this announcement, Ami Schneider, and finally, Astra Taylor, a documentary filmmaker, writer, and co-founder of the Debt Collective, a union of debtors that came out of the Occupy movement. Welcome all to the Robust Opposition.
Hello.
So we're going to start with you, Tanya. Tell me your story, which basically will include when and why you decided you wanted to go to college, what you wanted to study, how you heard about Corinthian, who approached you, and what they promised.
I've always wanted to go to college. Actually, I was the first person in my family to attend college and graduate. And then I actually was watching TV and I seen an ad on TV about Everest College. They promised all these wonderful things, how they can help me find a job and give me a good education and this and that, but it was all a lie. I mean, that's pretty much, there's nothing good that I can say. I mean, it's all bad things that I can say. But I feel like while I was there, I mean, like I said, I didn't really have no experience with, like I said, I was the first person to go to college out of my family. So it was a really exciting thing. So I didn't know about all the mishaps that college can, do. And as far as the financial aid things and stuff like that, I just really wanted to just start, like I have a baby. I want to make a better opportunity for him. And, but it's just, everything just failed.
Now, did you have any hesitancy when because I read, actually it was in the Frontline documentary that Astra asked me to watch, which was excellent. They talked about how if people had any insecurities about how they were going to pay for it or how they were going to make it work, they preyed on your insecurities to, get you to sign on the dotted line. Did you have that kind of experience with them?
Absolutely. I mean, it was all about the financial aid and taking out additional loans and stuff like that. They made it seem like it wasn't going to be a problem. So
okay. Now, let's ask you about this, Ami. What's your story? When and why did you decide you wanted to go to college? What did you want to study? How did you hear about EDMC? Who approached you and what they promised?
So all through high school, I actually didn't want to go to college. It wasn't until I had actually joined the workforce and got caught in kind of a dead-end job. I was working at a shipping and distribution company I ended up working there for like 6 years throughout my whole time in college, but I was full-time 3 years before enrolling. And the raises that I was getting was like 5 cents, 10 cents. I had to pretty much really like go in and advocate for myself to get probably the highest raise I ever got for anybody, which was 75 cents. And I was just sick of living that sort of life. I wanted to try something different. Everybody told me I was good at art, and encouraged me to pursue art as a degree. So I actually went into one of EDMC's campuses. It was the Illinois Institute of Art. And I was just looking for information. I went with my mom. I was interested in the graphic design program. And again, just looking for information. This is the first college that I had even looked at since I had graduated high school. Because the first college I looked at was Columbia College downtown in Chicago for the art college. And that didn't end up working out. So this was the first time since then that I had gone and even looked for information. I get into the recruitment office, and right away they're telling me, well, classes start in 3 weeks. And if you start now, you'll get these rates. And it was very boiler room tactics. Very high pressure. And my mom and I was just like, I don't know if this is what we want. And they're like, yeah, don't you want to make something of yourself using like those really, like those insecurities, like the things that we had said previous in the conversation, they were bringing up as points later. Like when I had mentioned that I was stuck in my job that I didn't like, they're like, well, don't you want to move on to something better? I thought you were trying to, better your position in life. And then my mom had mentioned, well, she's like, her job's not terrible, but she mentioned that she felt unfulfilled because she didn't get to pursue her dreams and passions. And they brought that up. They're like, don't you want your daughter to be able to fulfill her dreams? So it's like everything that they listened to us say to them, they started using against us to try to just like, I don't know, Jedi mind trick us into signing up. Because we had only gone for information. And by the time we left, I was signed up for classes. My mom, I remember her like literally telling the recruiter, I can't afford this. I don't know how I'm supposed to afford this. I have all of this debt already. She had mortgage, she had just car debt, just different types of debt. And she was like, I don't think that I'm even going to qualify for this. Like, I don't know. I want to think about it. And they're like, no, you'll qualify, without even really giving us a chance to think about anything. And 3 weeks later, I was enrolled. Well, I was enrolled that day, and 3 weeks later, I started school. And I started in online classes because I wasn't able to start on campus that fast. So my whole first semester or quarter was all online. I kind of realized.
I want to ask you about your experience in the next set of questions.
Mm-hmm.
But first, I want to stick with the financial aspect of things, because I want to ask, and we'll go back to you, Tanya. How much loans did you have to take out from which different entities? And were they counseling you on how easy it would be to pay back these loans?
Absolutely not. I currently owe about 50 grand in student loans for a 2-year degree.
But which entities?
For them, it was easy.
Or was it multiple loans?
Yeah, it's actually multiple loans, because they encouraged me to get like a loan where I can like the money will come directly to me to like support me as far as like housing and stuff like that. They took out a loan for me for that. And not only that, then I got the loans for like books and my tuition in college and stuff like that. So yeah, and I really didn't even need the loan for the housing and stuff like that. I didn't even need that, but they took that out. So,
yeah. Now
yeah, they took full advantage, because I didn't know. I didn't know. So they just took advantage of it.
Now, before we talk about what these classes were like, I want to ask Astra if you want to jump in to talk and to make any comment on the financing aspect at this time.
Yeah, I mean, the stories that Amy and Tanya are telling, you have to multiply those by hundreds of thousands of people. Like the scale of this is just so boggling. So when we talk about the numbers, and this is what the lawsuits, from various state attorneys generals were about, and false and deceptive marketing techniques. But it was really this high pressure, high pressure deceptive strategy at an amazing scale of, and of course, like the recruiters are paid bonuses for this. So quickly, like the financial model of these schools, they're for-profit colleges. So they are run for profit. They're traded on the stock exchange, but all of their money comes from federal student aid. So there's something called the 90-10 rule. 90% of the money these schools make comes from student loans through the Department of Education, so federal student loans. Then they have to access this 90% of federal student funding, they have to come up with 10% some other way. So they take people's GI benefits. Or at Corinthian, they created their own private predatory lending scheme. And this is what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau sued them over. They were called Genesis loans. And so they basically made that 10% of revenue by saying, here, have a high interest predatory loan on us from our company. That way we can get federal funds. And so unlike a community college where tuition is reasonable, the tuition at these schools is sky high. So they max out people's federal loans. Then they sign them up for private student loans. They sign them up for these in-house predatory lending products and just bury students in debt for degrees that, ultimately were worthless. And students really, I think it's the last thing I'll say is, it makes sense that people didn't know any better because a community college is not spending millions of dollars a year advertising. But that's what these fake schools were doing. Instead of spending money on classrooms, on teachers, on education, almost all their budget went straight to marketing. And so this is what they were literally doing with that astounding amount of money that they were generating from students. They were paying for marketing and paying the CEOs millions of dollars. I mean, that was the business model, and it still is because these schools are still in operation. Yeah, this is America.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about what the experience was like at these for-profit colleges, and I just want to read one paragraph out of Dave Dayan's excellent article in the American Prospect. Dave has been on my show several times. He's an excellent journalist. Corinthian was found to have aggressively pitched students on enrollment, offering loans that were up to 10 times the comparable cost of a community college degree. Job placement statistics were fudged. Instructors included disbarred lawyers. Students were given college credit for externships at fast food restaurants. Several final exams were open book, and some involved playing board games. After graduating, students were sent off with credentials that actively harmed their career prospects. They spoke of being laughed at job interviews. And I will tell you also in the Frontline documentary, they interviewed a couple of students who went to one of their nursing schools, and their entire psychology rotation was at the Museum of Scientology. I mean, I can't even believe that. It's just laughable. So I want to, go back to you, Amy. Talk about what your experience was like at this college. Did it seem legitimate in any way at all to you?
At first it did, because I was taking a lot of the core classes for art and things like that. So I was taking like fundamentals of design, color theory. These seemed like, something that you would learn in college for art. But then when I started getting into the courses that were focused on my major, that's when I started to realize they were all pretty much the same class. That's when I really started to encounter a lot of problems with teachers not showing up, teachers showing up maybe, an hour and a half late into your course when you're paying for 3 credit hour courses, and things like that. Like our teachers would just not even show up. It was like the same materials over and over. We were told to just Google things, Google how to do the tutorials. That was our assignment, was to just make up our own assignments. A lot of us were just teaching each other the same things. It was just, us teaching ourselves without a lot of teacher instruction. I remember at one point I had an instructor come in and showed a bootleg video that said, do not redistribute. And it was like, you can't even, with all of our tuition, pay for like a legit copy of this. I remember going to on location photo shoot things, and we didn't even have permits. And it's like, we're paying all of this tuition. They didn't even get permits. So like we would get kicked out of places while we showed up for classes. I remember that one time this happened, we were supposed to go shoot at this junkyard. We got kicked out of the junkyard, and the teacher kind of chastised us and blamed us for it, because we didn't know that we weren't supposed to tell the junkyard people why we were there. So we were looking for our teacher and informed them, and they were like, yeah, you can't take pictures, so you got to go. So like it was just really ridiculous stuff like that. And then we ended up spending that whole class in a Starbucks. And it was a lot of things like that where we had I had a studio lighting class, and my teacher didn't end up renting out the studio to like teach us the lighting. So we ended up just having like outside classes or just hanging out in the classroom because other classes or students could rent out the studio, even though our class was literally requiring that. So it's just, yeah, a lot of things like that. And then another thing that they told us was that we were supposed to be able to use the facilities and equipment after graduation. We found out from people that had graduated that that wasn't the case. People that had graduated had started kind of telling other people that they were still friends with that were on campus, that everything that was said about job placement and all of that was completely a load of crap. So it was pretty much like 50%, like halfway through my education there, that I really realized that it was a scam. And I remember trying to tell my mom, like, hey, this school is a scam. My mom was like, how can a school be a scam? Like you have student loans for this school. Like if you don't finish, I have to pay this within, 6 months if you leave, or immediately, I think it is, if you just drop out. So it was a lot of pressure to just stay in and be enrolled. And then compounded with, they would pull you out of classes to have you sign more loan documents. And it was just really all about money. And like, you would be in class and you would have all of your art supplies, everything in the classroom, and they would literally send a loan officer up there to the class to pull you out. You didn't bring your belongings, and you went down to this little window that was outside of the school store, and they're like, hey, you need to sign this document if you want to go back to class, where all of your stuff is. And it's just like, that was also kind of really embarrassing, and like, I don't know, just getting pulled out of class because your money didn't go through and they're asking you to sign loans in the middle of class. Like, I feel like that was part of the design of trying to psychologically manipulate us at these schools.
Yeah, and also tell the story you told me before we went live about what your workshop was like and what they told you that day.
So, I'm so sorry.
Your dog?
So after when we graduated from the schools, from the art institutes, they have what's known as a portfolio day. So this is kind of what you work for the whole time that you're enrolled, and you spend a lot of money to get your portfolio, to get your prints, to get signage, giveaways. You make like little giveaway, like basically your resume, really nice versions of that. And that's all at your table. And as I was setting this up, which is where employers are supposed to come and talk to you so that you can potentially network and get a job. While I was setting that up, my career advisor came up to me and had me sign a piece of paper that essentially said that the school was not going to help me with job assistance because I was pregnant when I graduated, and the birth of my kid was going to be like within the 6-month, I think it was, time period. So they said that it didn't really make sense to help me with getting a job. But like looking back at it now with the knowledge that I have now, I know that was so that they could exclude me from their job placement statistics, but I didn't know any of that back then. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I was just like, oh, I guess I have to sign this, because that's kind of the way she presented it, was like, you need to sign this before you walk. So I signed the document, and they didn't help me with any sort of job assistance after I had graduated.
Okay. Tanya, talk about your experience at your school, what the classes and the whole experience was like, and then what happened afterwards.
So it's different for me and her. I went to college online, so everything was online, but these people didn't even know if I had a high school diploma. It's not even on their records. But I was promised things like 101, 2, and 2. I never got that. And it was just, I think they flew by me. Like they just was passing me just to pass me. Like, it was just so easy. Like, it was a horrible experience. I just can't explain. It's just so, I just feel like I wasted my whole time. The whole 2 years there.
So you finished the program, you didn't drop out, or you finished?
Absolutely not. I finished the whole program. Yes, I did. And after that, I thought they were going to have me, because they said that I was going to have like internship and stuff like that. They never did that, set me up for anything like that. They just left me hanging. They just left me out. Left me out. Like, it just, after I got my degree, it was like it was over with.
Mm.
There was nothing that they could do for me.
Astra, talk about how this fits into what you and I both fight, which is neoliberalism. The idea that private profit-making enterprises are going to provide public goods and services better, cheaper, faster than the government, but all they end up doing is extracting money and not providing.
Yeah.
Give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, for-profit colleges are the logical endpoint of a society that turns education into a commodity instead of treating education as a public good, as something that should just be a right, as something that should be free, as something we should all get to access if we want to. I mean, I think the view of the Debt Collective is that you shouldn't need a college degree to like get a job that pays you enough to live, right? I mean, so everyone should be entitled. If you're working, you should be paid a living wage and be able to live in dignity and have access to universal health care, all the services you need, unemployment insurance, all that. But if you do choose to go to college, you shouldn't have to mortgage your future. You shouldn't have to take on a life-destroying amount of debt. And you shouldn't be treated as basically just a nothing that is there so that these people at the top get to profit. I mean, these schools are, why they're so disgusting is that, again, the investors, the executives are making millions and millions of dollars, and that money they're then using to lobby officials in Washington who are propping up the entire system. It's really important to understand the Department of Education was a total partner in crime with Corinthian. So, and they're still partners in crime with all of these schools because they're adhering to this 90-10 rule. Again, students like Tanya and Amy went to these schools and saw that you had to fill out your FAFSA, your federal student aid form. They saw that the Department of Education was there and you could get federal student loans. So it's like all the signs are saying, hey, the government is supporting this. But really, it's the worst kind of collusion between the private sector and the public sector because it's public money, not going towards a real public purpose.
Right. Now,
yeah. And
government...
I just want to say that the Department of Education, though, when the school was collapsing, it bailed out the school. Because if Corinthian had just shut down all of its campuses, then every student whose campus was shut down would have gotten what's called a closed school discharge and just gotten their loans canceled. They didn't do that. They facilitated the sale of Corinthian to a company that was what? A debt collection agency. It had no experience in running schools before. And they did that just so that they wouldn't have to bail out students. And if it wasn't for Tanya and 14 others, that would have been the end of the damn story.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that, but first I want to mention, the Frontline documentary, which was so excellent, did talk about how that nonprofit debt collection company took over the colleges. But there were clips from going back as far as 2009 of Dick Durbin and some other congressmen really trying to crack down on this. And the implication was because of all the funding from K Street, the lobbyists, they couldn't do it. And then finally, Kamala Harris, who, I didn't think much of her tenure as Attorney General of the state I used to live in, California, but she did do a good thing, and she investigated it and brought the first charges. Do you want to talk about the government response?
The government's response to the investigation was to basically say, okay, we're going to cut off the federal funds until you kind of get your house in order, right? But Corinthian was running such a Ponzi scheme that it collapsed. I don't know if the Department of Education knew that it was going to provoke such a response. And then again, it had to jump in and kind of bail out the school. But it's important, even with the lawsuits, Harris was leading at the time, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau going after its Genesis internal lending program. The problem is that what was never front and center was the students. And that's what the Department of Education should be all about. The Department of Education should be all about protecting students, making sure that education is really education. And that was just like basically not on their radar. It was like the students are just collateral damage, right?
Well, We have
Yeah.
regulatory capture of these agencies.
100%.
I remember
Yeah.
I was fighting fracking in California for many years. And we had the Department of Conservation, which had under it the DOGGR, the Department of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Regulation. And it had a dual mission, this department, to exploit the resource, which is to make money from it, and to regulate it and protect the public and the environment. And those two missions were at odds. And
that's what Department of Education is like that right now, because we fund education through loans instead of just publicly funding it. That turns the Department of Education into the country's, like one of the country's biggest banks, because people owe $1.6 trillion to it. But also it turns it into a predatory debt collector. And that's the Department of Education shouldn't be a debt collector. It should be providing education. So that's where neoliberalism takes us on the wrong path, right?
Yeah, I remember reading, and I don't remember which year this was, that that the government made $46 billion a year in interest from student loans. And I thought at the time, instead of making money from students, they should be paying for students to go to college. And I know we're going to talk about this, at the end of the show, is what the real solutions are. But let's go back to the activism, because, with the exception of publications like the American Prospect, I didn't see any mention of the Debt Collective and, the Corinthian 15 in the mainstream corporate media, of course. So, Tanya, I'd like you to describe the Corinthian 15 and what you did, and what you think of your efforts.
It took a lot of work to do what we did. I was so terrified to actually say, okay, we're going to go on strike and I'm not going to pay these loans, because there's consequences for that. But we did it, and it actually worked. It worked.
I don't say what you mean by going on strike. These were 15 people that refused to pay the debt.
Exactly. It's plain and simple. It's like, why would I pay for something that I'm not even going to use? And I was scammed. I'm not going to pay for that. That's not my fault. Like, I did everything that I was supposed to do. I'm trying to live the American dream, and this school, they defrauded me. So why should I have to pay for that? And that's what we did in Anaheim, California. We went to the meeting, and I told them, I said, I feel like they should pay for I shouldn't have to pay, and I feel like they should give me my 2 years back. Like now that they have discharged our loans, I still can't get that 2 years back. So now what?
Well, talk about the process.
It took a lot of work.
Organized, how the 15 of you organized and decided that you were going to do this debt strike.
We just all came together and said, we're not going to pay. That's just how it went. We all met at a meeting, and we just said, we're not going to pay them. That was the easiest way to go, even though we knew it was going to be consequences. And they could have, did something to us as far as went after us as far as the debt. But we said we weren't going to pay them nothing.
Astra, do you want to talk about the Debt Collective? Describe to people what it is, how it formed after Occupy Wall Street, and what your involvement with the Corinthian 15 was?
Yeah. So I wasn't one of the main organizers with this. I was a kind of supporting role, and I've become kind of more actively involved in the Debt Collective as the years have gone by. But I was very much part of Occupy Wall Street in New York City, and joined a working group around debt. And one of our initial projects was something called the Rolling Jubilee, which was the very first project that essentially we figured out that our debts are for sale on the secondary debt market. So often when a debt collector calls you, it's not like that's the hospital that saved your life. It's not that that's the ambulance company that picked you up and took you to the hospital, or it's not even like the phone, the phone company. When bills go into collections, they're sold off. They're sold to debt brokers and debt buyers, and then ultimately to debt collectors. So we figured out how to purchase debt from those debt brokers. It's sold for pennies on the dollar, and then we bought it in order to erase it. And we erased millions of dollars of medical bills, of payday loans, And we bought a big portfolio of Genesis loans from Everest College, some millions and millions of dollars worth. We did not pay millions and millions of dollars for it. And so we canceled that. We abolished that debt. And we said, these are illegitimate. Education should be free. Immoral to put people into debt for education, for healthcare. And that enabled us to start reaching out to students who had attended Everest College. Also, Nathan Horns, who's one of the Corinthian 15, was already organizing, similar to Tanya, was like, something is wrong here. And he started to read about Corinthian in the news and started to try to organize fellow Corinthians. They were meeting. But here's the thing. The reason the debt strike was the way to go, as Tanya said, it's like, why pay for something where it's a scam? and why pay so much that it's going to ruin your life? The other thing is student debt is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Unlike almost every other kind of debt, you cannot go through bankruptcy. Joe Biden kind of put the final nail in that coffin when he was senator in 2005, getting rid of bankruptcy protections for private student loans. So people had no other alternative. And also, Amy mentioned this, but and Tanya probably signed these too. There were arbitration clauses. So meaning the school basically said, sign away your right to sue. So these students weren't able to engage in a class action lawsuit. So literally all the alternatives were blocked. Striking was the way to go. And the debt collective, in collaboration with some creative lawyers, realized that there was this obscure legal provision in the Higher Education Act that says something very reasonable. It says, if you go to an institution that breaks state law, you have the right to have your loans discharged. But nobody had ever used this provision, and the Department of Education wasn't telling people how to do it. So the debt collective actually, alongside the strike, we developed this legal strategy that's the basis for all the debt relief you're seeing from the Biden administration, or the vast majority of it that you're seeing these days. So the debt collective, that was our first sort of big campaign. And the debt collective is not just about student debt. We're a union for debtors. And our view is that, debt is an asset. Every debt we owe is in somebody else's investment. So debt is a form of economic power that working people can wield. So, we think of a debtors union as very complementary to a labor union, just like workers can come together and organize in the workplace. Debtors can organize for a complementary form of economic power and say, we can't pay, we shouldn't pay. We want the cancellation, the abolition of these debts, and we want the things we need to survive and thrive, like free education and healthcare.
Yeah.
So that model is the model we're experimenting with and growing over time.
Now, I remember closer to the time of Occupy, you guys also bought some medical debt and forgave it. Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, we bought a portfolio of medical debt. I'll say we don't use the word forgiveness. So we, because we don't think medical debtors or student debtors did anything wrong. So, I'll never forget one of the Corinthian strikers in Washington saying, I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm demanding justice. I do want to say, Tanya, when Tanya says it was a lot of work, we also, the Corinthian 15, they didn't just go on strike and sit back. Tanya testified, you spoke to the Senate, right? You went to the Department of Education. We had a meeting with the Department of Education, the CFPB, the Treasury. Tanya and others spoke at. So it was also, there was a very painful process of having to tell this story over and over in front of the people who are fucking you over. And they basically make you testify again and again and say, this horrible thing happened to me on your watch. I'm going to say it in this Senate room. I'm going to say it in this. Right, Tanya? I think that's important. And then there was an expectation when this announcement happened that you should be grateful for it. And you were pushing back on that, I think, rightly.
Yeah, Amy, now you're not one of the Corinthian students. You're another for-profit, EDMC. Have you been paying your debt, or have you been doing your own personal strike?
I was on a personal debt strike from 2010 to 2015. And then kind of like Astra had mentioned, Nathan Horns, one of the Corinthian 15, was already organizing and had seen, articles about Corinthian. A bunch of us from the art institutes were also already organizing, and we saw articles about the Corinthian 15 and started emailing the debt collective like, hey, the same thing is happening to us. We've seen all of these articles where you guys are stepping in to get, spotlight on them, but it's also happening to us. And they were like, you guys are already on our radar. This is bigger than you know. And I found out that it wasn't, just an individualized college thing. It really was a systemic issue. So I've been on official strike Since 2015, I filed my borrower defense shortly after all of the Corinthian stuff started coming out. I think it was August of 2015 that I filed, and then I hadn't heard anything for like a really long time after filing to like even let me know that they had received it. And this was still back when like the Department of Education didn't even have the form. Like the form was literally made by the debt collective to file and assert your borrower defense. The one that the Department of Education has now was definitely modeled off of what the debt collective had already created. So that's how I filed mine, because they had the back end legalese on it. And I was able to file it through them and then send it off and have them actually like look at it. I had to call them several times just to, look at it. But yeah, I have not paid a single penny to them. Before I found out how to do like the borrower defense and everything, I was doing deferments, forbearances, and then I went into pre-default before I filed for my borrower defense because I had exhausted all of my means and I didn't have any way to pay. So yeah, I've been on debt strike. My school was similar to Corinthian in all of those respects. So my school got sued for $11 billion. And as they mentioned before, the government kind of just gave them a slap on the wrist. So when EDMC got sued for that $11 billion, they settled for $93 million, which is literally less than a penny on the dollar. And they didn't have to have any admission of wrongdoing at all. The schools kept on operating. They ended up selling to another for-profit operator called the Dream Center. Dream Center lost accreditation at several campuses and graduated people without having accredited degrees. People were taking unaccredited courses. And the school was basically like lying to them at the behest of, this was under the Trump administration. So DeVos was actually telling the Dream Center folks like, no, it's going to work out, and like had a huge hand in that whole way that played out. So for us, there's still a couple campuses of the Art Institute that are still operating, I believe in Florida. So they're still enrolling people. The government had a chance to shut these schools down, and it hasn't happened. They're still funneling money to these schools. These schools are still scamming people, graduating people with useless degrees, and putting people in debt when it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned systemic, and I think this is really another aspect of neoliberalism, how it atomizes people into feeling that it's all about individual responsibility, and there's no collective, there's no solidarity. I remember Occupy Los Angeles had a offshoot called Occupy Fights Foreclosures. And there was a home in the San Fernando Valley that the Fernandez family owned, and they were being foreclosed on, and they refused to leave. And they held on to that home, we called it Fort Hernandez, for a year. And we would have meetings out of there. And Bilal Ali, who was with another offshoot called Occupy the Hood, was telling me, he said, Lauren, you would be surprised at how many homes within this radius of this house are also being foreclosed upon. And I said, well, Bilal, why don't you get them all together and go over to Brad Sherman's office, the congressman around the corner, occupy his office and refuse to leave until he does something about it. And he said, because Lauren, these people are ashamed. They think it's their own fault that they failed to provide for their family, and they're ashamed. And that's how they do it. Now, the other thing, how they do it is with these student loans. And obviously, these for-profit colleges are not the only ones that we're talking about. The regular colleges are also taking advantage of student loans. And that is why college tuition costs have gone well beyond the rate of inflation, because they know there's this money to pay it back, similar to, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac kind of blowing up the housing market with all their loans. So what we found, and I'd like you to address this, is that you would think when the colleges get all this money that they would keep tuition low, or they would have smaller classes, or they would pay professors more. But that's the opposite of what's happening. Tuition is still rising. Classes aren't getting any smaller. And all the money is going to pay administrators. They have more administrators than they've ever had at these colleges. Many of them are making, 7-figure salaries. Also, these coaches, these football coaches and whatnot, are making 7-figure salaries. And they're building these fancy dorms, these fancy gyms, these fancy dining halls. And you've got adjunct, well, fewer professors are getting tenure, more people are becoming adjuncts. A lot of these adjuncts get $2,500 a course. Many of them are homeless, living in their cars. I want to do a show on this. Many female adjuncts are working as sex workers. I mean, I was shocked to hear this. And this is what's, happened with higher education since all these loans. So what are your thoughts on that, Astra?
I mean, so California, since that's where you were at, I think it's important to tell the story there. I mean, California into the 60s had, sort of the most famous free higher education system at every level. So, community colleges or junior colleges, and then the state schools, and then the University of Berkeley. It was free. Every person who went to these schools got to go for free. And then in the 1960s, students started getting active against the Vietnam War, fighting for racial justice. You had the Black Panthers emerging at a community college. And Ronald Reagan, who would become the president, was governor of California. And he basically declared a war on the students who were getting political and said, let's make it, this is a quote, make them pay, and they'll think twice before they carry a protest sign, a picket sign. And he said, the state shouldn't be in the business of subsidizing curiosity.
Wow.
And so student loans begin in that moment. So that's when fees started being charged in California. And it was a right-wing reactionary project and a racist project. The California Faculty Association has done a study that said as the student body got more diverse in California, tuition started going up, student loans started going up, right? And as you're saying, administrators start getting rich, and the labor, and not that, the faculty that's turning into adjuncts, getting really underpaid. Also, like the cafeteria workers, the people who just work on campus are paid crap too. And yeah, the costs for the students are rising year after year, and students are being buried in debt. So we took a wrong turn by moving towards this individually debt financed model. Education should be free for everybody. We have our K through 12 public schools aren't perfect, but at least they're free. And so we have a model to build on. And we need to fight, for that. But student loans, once that faucet started flowing, schools then are just incentivized to keep raising prices. And so we need, federal funding that has strings attached that says, you can't charge these out of control prices. You have to invest in learning instead of in these, fancy dorms or whatever, football games. And, really, and then also center things like racial justice and making things right, because so many generations of people have been locked out of higher education and that opportunity. So that's why the Debt Collective is really clear. We need to cancel all student debt and reimagine our education system from the bottom up and go back to that model that used to exist in California, but instead of making it public education for just a small portion of the population who are mostly white guys, do it for everybody, right? Do it right this time for everyone. We'll all be better off if we do that. That's the thing. We would all benefit.
Now, that Biden almost any day now is going to announce that he's going to forgive $10,000 worth of student debt. Now, this is a far cry from even what Elizabeth Warren had asked for, which was $50,000, which is a far cry from what we supporters of Bernie Sanders wanted, which was a total cancellation of all the debt. I mean, right now, the stats are there's over 1.6 trillion of student debt, 43.4 million borrowers. The average student loan debt balance is 37,000. While the average balance, including private loan debt, may be as high as $50,000. So $10,000 is really, it's actually, I think, going to be counterproductive for the Democrats. It's almost in the midterms, What are your guys' thoughts on that? When you heard that President Biden, who, is supposed to be so much better than Trump, is only going to cancel $10,000 worth of student debt?
When I heard that, I thought it was grossly inadequate. I mean, it's so easy for that to even just build up in interest alone so fast too. I have people that I'm organizing with, that, they've already paid like $96,000 on a $96,000 loan, and then they still owe like $96,000 because of the interest. So eliminating just $10,000, like, what is that going to do? We're going to be back in the same spot in a matter of like months with how fast interest capitalizes. It's not going to actually help people. There's so many people, like myself included. I have $120,000 worth of debt. What is $10,000 of debt going to do for somebody like me? It's nothing. It's not going to release the financial burdens. It's not going to put me in a better place to have, buying power and actually make a life for myself. It's going to just be a drop in a bucket of a debt that's still insurmountable with only $10,000 of it removed.
Yeah. Tanya, your thoughts?
I'm not gonna comment on that right now. It's absurd, but I'm gonna let Astra go ahead.
All right, Tanya can take the last. I mean, I'm of two. I guess I have two minds. So I totally agree with Amy. The debt collective's position is it all needs to go, and that this debt is immoral because education shouldn't be debt financed. And there are all of these other benefits, the economic benefits. It'll be a boost. It'll narrow the racial wealth gap. I think it would help put us on the path to free college because it would increase this contradiction. You'd be like, okay, so we've canceled the debt. Like, how do we solve the real problem? At the same time, I'm keenly aware of the fact that, it will be precedent setting. I mean, for the president to cancel student debt, that shows it can be done. The Corinthian, even this massive Corinthian announcement, even though it's 7 years too late by our clock, it proves that this debt can be erased. And so I think, I think I'm trying to approach this as an organizer, which is this will show, debtors fought for this. And even if, of course, the administration is going to give us everything, it proves that, it will only happen because debtors got mobilized and fought back. And we need to take that moment and keep pushing for more. So I'm thinking, like, how do we grow from that, and say, look, they did it, they can do more. And we need to make them do more.
Yeah, you remind me of what I learned in my Marshall Gans class at the Kennedy School of Government Leadership, Organizing, and Action. You need to take these incremental wins and use it to boost morale and grow the movement.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, do you have any hope? This is a lot of people. I mean, 1.6 trillion people are a lot of people. Do you have any hope that we can organize them to do the same kind of thing, the debt strike?
Well, I get huge hope from Tanya because Tanya's here right now. Tanya doesn't need to be here. Your Corinthian debt, you could have said, okay, by Corinthian 15, we won for the Corinthians. But she's not doing that. And, there were some really great quotes from Tanya in the press saying, this was never really just about Corinthian. And so that's where, I do think there's hope. I mean, this really touches people's lives. I guess I'd love to hear Tanya's thoughts on this, on staying in the fight, and also on the shame issue you mentioned, because a barrier is people feeling ashamed. You mentioned that with housing debt, but it's a barrier for student debt too, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, at the end of the day, like I said, when we first started this, it wasn't all about Corinthian debt. It was about student debt, period. Like you said, we want free college for everyone. I mean, that's one of the goals. And like Astra, I'm gonna piggyback off of her when she said, people know, like, everyone knows that our debt can be erased. So this is just more power for us to just keep on going and get everybody else's stuff to get erased. Just like, I feel so bad for Amy because it's like she was in the predicament that I was in, and now mine is erased and hers not. So it's like, we just got to keep going and keep going. We have to keep going. This is not it. It's more work to do. And I just wish everybody would join the debt collective. Because it's powers and numbers. So that's how we gonna win.
Well, unless
and we went
anyone
from
has
15 to 100 to 300. It was a long struggle. Jesus. But we're not done though.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of also hope in the union organizing movement. Amy was telling me before the show about a union she's organized at her current workplace. I just covered at Moog Music In Asheville, the rally, they're trying to organize a union. They've got these workers making $2,000 synthesizers that aren't even making $15 an hour, you know, and the Starbucks workers are unionizing, and Amazon. So I have great hope in the power of organizing. And I want to know if anyone else has any final words before we close out.
We're fighting for everybody. That's the thing. And even those of us, I did pay off my student loans in 2012. So around when I started getting into this. And, you know, I'm still in the movement because I think it's a corruption of education and democracy and equality to force people into debt, you know, just to survive. And again, you know, I think Ronald Reagan's totally wrong. The state, what should the state exist for except to subsidize curiosity so that it can help us all live like full, healthy, fulfilled lives? But yeah, as Tanya said, power in numbers. It's really true. I mean, the other side has a lot of money power. That's the numbers they have. They have big numbers on their balance sheets. But we do too, because $1.7 trillion is a lot. And that's how much debt people have. That's just student debt. You know, that's before medical debt, car debt, credit card debt, payday loan debt, carceral debt. But we only can use that power when we come together and we organize. Yeah.
I find it interesting, of course, that, you know, when it's about a human need, they talk about how are we going to pay for it. You know, Joe Manchin was able to tank Biden's entire Build Back Better plan because of the deficit. But meanwhile, when it comes to bailing out the banks, tax breaks for millionaires, endless wars, subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, another 400 million to Ukraine. You know, they managed to find the money. They don't ask how are you going to pay for it. Yeah. It's just a question that comes when it comes to human needs. But anyway, I want to thank you all for being on the show tonight. I think it was an excellent show. And viewers, please share this show and keep fighting.